Passionate, driven, enthusiastic, euphoric. This is who we are as entrepreneurs. But how we leverage these incredible attributes to dream and build businesses that scale and grow is what this podcast is all about. Hello, I'm attorneypreneur Josh Brown, and welcome to Franchise Euphoria. Hello, everybody. Josh Brown here, back for another great episode of Franchise Euphoria. And just want to wish everybody a happy early 4th of July. I know for myself, my family, we are going to be heading down to a lake house to enjoy the weekend, get on the boat, spend some time with family. So hopefully you are doing the same. Today, we are going to talk about, will owning a franchise make you broke? Interesting topic. I've been reading a good bit about statistics, some statistical data on franchising. And as you know, statistics can be a little bit deceptive. And so you have to know where the statistics come from, who commissions these statistics, and so forth. But according to Nation's Restaurant News, a survey was done which shows that more than half of franchisees struggle to make a decent living, and nearly 2/3 would not recommend investing in their franchise system. This is according to a new survey sponsored by a coalition of unions pushing to try to reform the franchise business model. In addition, the survey showed that 42% of franchisees that were surveyed were dissatisfied with their franchise system. This the survey was actually conducted by a coalition called Change to Win and was commissioned to be done by an organization called franchisegrade.com, whose owner, Jeff Leffler, I did have on my program, and I know. And it's interesting because those kind of statistics can be powerful for people in terms of decisions that they're making on whether or not to buy into franchise systems. On the flip side of that, you have the International Franchise Association, the IFA, which has been fighting many of the union's efforts, and they took big issue with this survey, and actually cited to a survey that they put together, or to a survey from the market research firm Franchise Business Review, in which they say 78.6% of franchisees would recommend their franchise to others. And the Franchise Business Review surveyed 25,000 operators, as opposed to the survey commissioned from franchisegrade.com surveyed 1,100 operators. The International Franchise Association also noted that renewal rates for franchisees exceed 90%, a historical high. And they argued that the franchise business has been growing at a faster rate than the overall economy. So here you have, folks, two very different surveys with two very different outcomes. I don't know how these surveys were conducted. I don't know what kind of questions were asked. All we have to look at this particular time are two very, very different outcomes for what's seemingly a similar type of analysis or similar type of questions. And that is trying to find out, is a franchise system a wise investment? I mean, that's ultimately what we are looking into. And of course, we know that that the unions are looking to try to make things more even-handed. They're trying to level the playing field in the franchise system, as I've talked about on previous episodes, and it is true. It's not an even playing field. The franchisor has significant power and control over their franchisees, and they have the ability to dictate that they operate in certain fashions, and they have oftentimes the resources to mandate that they operate a certain way, even if they might be violating the law, because at the end of the day, the franchisee doesn't have, in most instances, the ability to fight off the power of a franchisor. So I thought these statistics were interesting, not necessarily because I believe them. I mean, quite frankly, I think that there's a margin of error probably on both sides. I mean, I have a very, very difficult time believing, as an example, as the IFA notes, that renewal rates for franchisees exceed 90%. I think that statistic is a little bit deceiving, because I want to know how many franchises don't even make it to their renewal date. So if you have a franchise, as an example, that has a 10-year term, when is the cutoff for when they examine whether or not the franchise renews on their deal, renews on their business? Because I can assure you that 90% of people who buy franchises don't renew. I know that to be sure. What I don't know is how they came up with this percent that renewal rates for franchisees exceed 90%. I think that's a little bit misleading. But to be fair, because again, I try to be fair on this show, I'm not leaning one way or the other. I'd like to know as well what franchisegrade.com utilized to conduct their survey, and how they came up with their percentages as well. But I think the overall point for this episode, again, is to highlight that depending on who you ask, depending on what system you're looking into, it's a risk. And it's a risk when you buy a franchise. It's a risk when you buy any business, for that matter. And it's very, very important to consider all of the options surrounding you, and to take a look with a very keen eye at what is right in front of you. I continue to see a lot of people who are buying franchises who, again, fall in love with the system, fall in love with the concept, fall in love with the idea of owning a business. And then they get into the business and they realize it's very different from what they actually wanted. Some of the things you obviously need to know, and this will bear on some of these statistics as well, is that going into any franchise system is going to be a large investment, and you're going to be putting your money at risk. In most instances, the franchise system is going to require you and or your spouse or your partners to also sign personal guarantees. They're going to collateralize the deal to ensure that if something happens to you or to the company under which you buy your franchise, that they're still going to be able to get their money. So oftentimes people need to pledge their houses, their cars, other significant collateral in order to become part of a franchise system that in some instances, if you get an overzealous franchisor, they can make your life very, very difficult, even if you follow all the rules. That being said, I have seen people in the franchising world be very, very successful and very, very happy, and taking part in a franchise system for long periods of time. I've also seen people who have done well in franchising, and for one reason or another gotten crossways with their franchise, and the franchisor making their life hell. It's a very, very, very big consideration when you're considering whether to buy a franchise or to start your own business. And all I would say to you is that if you're in that position right now, not only do you have to take stock of your personality and whether you're the type of person who likes to create things your own or follow other people's leads, you also need to understand intimately and do a thorough analysis, thorough research, do all of your due diligence, and take the time that's necessary to fully investigate the system that you're buying. But not only the system that you're buying, you need to investigate the territory in which you're going to go, where you're going to be located. If you don't have an exact location for a brick and mortar type franchise, if that's one you're looking at, you need to be intentional and have an understanding ahead of time of the types of locations you're looking for. You can't leave these things to chance. Once you sign on to a franchise and you sign the franchise disclosure documents and the franchise agreements, chances are you're going to be depositing money that you are not going to get back if you walk away. So again, I try to be upbeat, try to be positive on this podcast, but I also try to be realistic. And anybody who's going to get into a franchise system has to understand the risks associated with it ahead of time, and has to really approach it like you would approach anything that you're seriously considering. So what I want to do is really kind of give you 5 pointers to leave here with, so that you don't put yourself in a position where owning a franchise is really going to make you broke. Number one, I'd like for you, if you're considering owning a franchise, to really think about, are you really a good candidate for a franchise system? Think back to the jobs that you've had, the positions that you've been in. Have you done well within a structure that's more like a corporate structure, where there's more bureaucracy, there's less freedom of choice? You're almost like a spoke in a wheel type scenario. If that makes you cringe, then franchising may not be the best option for you. Number two, why are you buying the franchise that you're considering to buy? Are you buying it because you've heard from others that it's got a good chance of success? Are you buying it purely because you're looking at the economics associated with it? Or are you considering whether or not you will enjoy the day in and day out work that's associated with running a franchise? I mean, these are very, very important considerations. If you realize you are a person who would like to, who thinks you might fit well into a franchise, and you feel like you found the ideal franchise that matches your experience and your attitudes and your and your abilities with a particular system, then number three, take the time to do your due diligence. That would be the third recommendation. And what do I mean by that? There's lots of things that make up what you can do to do your due diligence, but at the very minimum, reach out to people who are already within the franchise system or who have been in the franchise system. And quite frankly, you should reach out to both. You should talk to people who are currently franchisees. You should talk to people who were franchisees and find out why they are not franchisees anymore. And you should really try to get to know the people at the corporate level, the franchisor. Start to get to know the team that you're now about to buy into. It's very, very, very important. Number four, you need to take an assessment of your cash flow situation. I know different people will tell you different numbers, but if you want to be sure that you're really giving yourself the best opportunity for success, I recommend that you have between 6 to 9 months and possibly even a year's worth of cash flow saved up, because you are going to likely struggle to get the business off the ground. Even though you're buying a system, even though in theory you've got a franchisor there to support you, there are things that are going to come up, just like in any business, that are going to cost you more money than you think. And the chances are it's going to take you anywhere between 6 months and a year to really get things going. You have to be sure that you have sufficient cash flow or sufficient access to cash to make sure that you can withstand the down times and really put yourself in the best position to succeed. Number five, and this is not number five because it's less important than 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're all equally important. I think you need to get an accountant involved and other professionals who can take a look at your system after you've done your own due diligence. Look, the reality is we all approach things from our own points of view, from our own lens, and your experiences are going to dictate how you approach the franchise research process. But it's very, very important that you also also take the time and spend the money that's going to be required and invest in professionals who can help you make these decisions. You need to find a good accountant, a business-minded accountant who doesn't just crunch numbers, but also has a good feel for business. I think you want to make sure you have a good banking relationship. It's going to be very, very important that you get to know, in my opinion, local bankers, local credit union folks. Not only can they introduce you to other people and possibly be good referral sources for whatever business you're buying, but they can also be very, very important in terms of cash flow and helping you along the way. Obviously, I think that you should find a good franchise lawyer that you know, like, and trust, who has worked in the franchise space and understands what these documents look like, because you won't be able to change everything in an agreement. You might be able to change some things, but most importantly, a good franchise attorney is going to educate you on the process itself, and that is equally as important as being able to change any of the documents. You need to know what you're getting into before you're getting into it. And then lastly, I'd say you need to talk to an investor and a financial advisor, because oftentimes when you're buying a franchise, you're utilizing your resources, your savings, your 401k, other retirement vehicles or other funds, and taking it from one place to invest it in a franchise. I strongly recommend that you talk to your financial advisors before you do that. Listen, the bottom line is I don't want you to make an investment that you're going to regret, and I certainly don't want you to own a franchise that's ultimately going to make you broke. And I talked about statistics earlier in the show, and I think you got to look at those with a grain of salt. I mean, we don't know what goes into all those statistics. I have difficulty fully believing them on either side. But what I do know is that there are people who are happy in franchising and there are people who aren't. And the people who aren't end up losing a lot of money. And I don't want you to be one of those people who's unhappy. So hopefully you've taken something from this episode, and enjoy your long 4th of July weekend. And I look forward to another episode next week. Until then, happy franchising.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.